Hi everyone! I wanted to go over ordering fractions, decimals, and integers today, or another thing that we can call them is rational numbers. So we're going to go over that today, and then also I just wanted to send out a little reminder of make sure that you have done your weekly assignment. Remember, you get 2 tries, so make sure you're getting it done. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so when you are ordering fractions, decimals, and integers, I have a couple of suggestions. So suggestion 1 that I have is to turn all of your numbers into the same form. Now, my favorite is decimals just because it is the easiest, I feel like, to compare. If you remember, fraction to decimal just means to divide. So your numerator would go inside and your denominator would go outside. And then you could put a decimal and a 0 and keep going. Percent to decimal, if you remember, there was like a little trick. It's really just dividing by 100. But when you are looking at the percent, instead of just dividing by 100 and doing a little bit more work, you can actually just move the decimal point 2 places to the left. And then an integer to a decimal, well, an integer is going to be a negative number. So any negative number is always going to be greater. I'm sorry. Any negative number is always going to be less than any positive number. So -7 is going to be less than 0. So if you have negative numbers that you're trying to order, just remember that your negative numbers are always less than your positive numbers. Okay, so on the next slide, we have Cameron ran 2 17/50 miles. Lauren ran 2 33/100 miles. So who ran the least? Now, if you remember, the word least just means the smallest. So the smallest amount. Okay, so the problem is we have a fraction and we have a decimal, which means that we need to change this fraction into a decimal so that we can compare. Now, if you notice, both of the whole numbers are the same. So really, I'm not even looking at the whole numbers. I'm just looking at that decimal part and that fractional part. So I'm going to convert 17/50 into a decimal by dividing. Important key part here is a decimal and a 0. 50 does not go into 1. 50 does not go into 17. But 50 goes into 170 3 times, because if I were to add 50 plus 50 plus 50, I get 150, right? Okay. I like to think of money that way. So like 50 cents, okay? So when I subtract, I get 20. So I want to keep going because I really want this to be 0 if I can get it there. So 50 goes into 200 4 times. I know that because 3 times 50 was 150, so then 4 times 50 would have to get me 200. So what this means is that Cameron ran 2 34/100, because that's the decimal part that we got, and then Lauren ran 2 33/100. So it asks the question, who ran the least distance? Well, 33 is less than 34/100. So 33/100 is less than 34/100. So Lauren ran the least distance. Now this one is really a little bit challenging. And the reason why is because a lot of times when we are doing problems like this, we get a little overwhelmed, okay? So I always say start with the ones that you know, okay? Start with the ones that you know. So off the top, hopefully you're sitting there going, well, I know that -1 is right here. So I'm going to put a yellow dot there because I know that. I also know that -2.5 I would go to -2, and then the halfway point would be right here. So I know that one. Okay. And I'm big on like checking them off as you go. So bam and bam, we did those. Okay, so now we got the blue dot and the green dot. Okay, now these are the ones that are might give us a little bit of a struggle. So let's look at the blue one first. So the blue dot says 1/4. 1/4. So what that means is that something is cut up into fourths. If you notice, there is no whole number, so we're actually talking about between 0 and 1. Well, if you look, my lines are not cut up into fourths, they're only cut in halves. So I need 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, because I have 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And then it says that I want the dot at 1/4. So it would be right about here, right about there, kind of halfway between this one and a half. So actually I should probably have put it right about here. Just, there we go. Either way, it's between 0 and a half. Okay, now the last one is the green dot. So the green dot is 1 4/10. Okay, well, I don't really want to cut it into 4/10. So let's use our thought process here. We know that 1 and 2 are right here. We know that right in between them is 1.5. If we know that, then we also know that 1 and 1.4 should just be a little bit behind it. That's it. That's all I'm asking you to do. Okay, and obviously you're not going to be plotting points on a test or anything like that, especially not on a STAR test, but they will probably give you a number line and they're going to ask you which one is plotted incorrectly. Okay, so that's probably how you're going to see it. Okay, on this next one, it says, given the numbers below, color in the circle with the greatest value, Well, so first off, I'm going to get rid of this one because it's a negative number. So I already know that that's not going to be it because that is not going to be the greatest. But then I have these two fractions here, and I told you I usually go to decimals. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go to decimals, and I'm going to say, okay, well, 2/25, I don't know. So I'm going to say 2 divided by 25. There's a couple different ways you could have solved this instead of turning them to decimals. You could have said this is 11 hundredths and then tried to turn this one into hundredths. Absolutely, that works too. There's a lot of different ways to get to the same answer in math, and it's a beautiful thing. So if you thought of a different way, that still is totally okay. So if you notice, I've said 25 can't go into 2 and it can't go into 20. But if I'm talking about 25, I'm talking about coins. I'm talking about a quarter. So I'm trying to get to 200. So 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, 200. Well, that took me 8 times because 8 times 25 does get me 200. And then I'm done. That's my decimal. So this is 0 and 8/10. So already I'm going 8 cents. If I'm thinking money, 8 cents is less than 11 cents. So that can't be my greatest. So now we're between these two right here. Now, sometimes when we have fractions like this, we do not need to divide them out because 72 hundredths means that we have our place value. Hundredths. Well, that's the hundredths right there. So that would be 72 hundredths. Okay. And so when I'm looking at that, so another thing with 72 out of 100 that I want to mention is that when we are writing things out of 100, if there is a whole number right here in the front, if you remember, it will go right here. So for now, this is just 0 and 72 hundredths. Okay, 0 and 72 hundredths. So when I'm looking at this right now, 72 cents is definitely bigger than 11 cents. This is like 72 pennies. So 72 pennies is bigger than 11 pennies. So bam, I'm gonna color. Ooh. That's why I don't color. I'm not good at coloring. Okay. Let's see. Order the following amounts from least to greatest. Well, so first off, when I see this problem, I go, wait a minute. I know that I should be looking at whole numbers because Ms. Wagner has told me. Let's look at some whole numbers here. Well, this one has a 0. So if I'm going from least to greatest, I'm going to look and see, like this one has a 1, and a 2. Well, that means already I know that 0 and 9/10 is my least because it doesn't even have a whole dollar. So Melissa is going to go first. Well, then I also can sit there and go, wait a minute, then I can also do the last one because this one's a whole number of 2 and those don't have that. So then I know that one's going to be last. So these are things that I like to think about because that can narrow down your answer choices really, really quick if you're watching. Okay. So then lastly, I've got 1 4/10 and 1 3/5. So if you are looking, you could also change this into a decimal. Remember, 3 divided by 5, or the numerator divided by the denominator. Decimal and a 0. 5 doesn't go into 3, but it goes into 30 6 times. So that means that this is 1.6, or 1 6/10. And if we're going from least to greatest, that means that the 4/10 would come first. So Melissa, then Hayden, then Adriana, and then Joshua is the correct order. Or if you want to say it in numbers, it would be 9/10, then it would be 1.4, or 1 4/10, then it would be 1 3/5, and lastly, it would be 2 2/9. Okay. Last question. This is one of my favorite questions because there's some little tricks to helping you do this a little bit easier without getting overwhelmed. First things first, if I'm going from least to greatest, I look at all of them and I say, hold on a minute, that's a negative. Doesn't matter what any of these other numbers are. As long as they're all positive, this one is the least. So already from least to greatest, oh, look at that beautiful line right there. I have -3 as my first number because that's my least. Well, so then I look and I say, okay, I'm going to turn that percent into a decimal because that's pretty easy because Miss Wagner has taught me Dr. Pepper, which is just pretty much by dividing by 100. So I'm going to move that decimal twice to the left. So 1, 2. So that makes that 1 6/10, or 1.6. And then I look and I go, wait a minute, this one doesn't have a whole number. So if I'm going least to greatest, well, this one doesn't even have a whole number. So that one has to be my next least because it doesn't have one whole. And then I look and I go, okay, I've got 1 6/10 and I've got 1 23/100. I do not want you to think about putting this one as the greatest just because it has more numbers. That is not correct. Remember, you have to think this like this is a ghost 0, right? So this is $1.60. That's $1.23. Place value is important. $1.60 and $1.23. That means that the $1.23 is the next least. And so my last one would be 160%. 160%. Now, on your weekly assignment, there's, I think, 1 or 2 of these type of questions. So please, please, please be careful. Set them up to be dividing. Divide those fractions into decimals. Move the decimal over for a percent. Just get them all to decimals and then compare. I know you can do this. Take your time. Use both attempts. And if you have any questions, email me. You guys are awesome.